On this edition of One Plus One, the debate over Sharia law in our legal system, inside the head of an AFL coach and the long road to Tibetan autonomy. Hello, I'm Jane Hutchin. Welcome to the program. The push to integrate Islam's Sharia law into Australia's legal system has generated considerable controversy. The Attorney-General says it won't happen, but opponents remain nervous. Iranian-born Briton Maryam Namazie has waged a prominent campaign against the introduction of Sharia law into the UK, making her a target for Islamic fundamentalists. Together with a group of prominent identities, including Salman Rushdie, she wants an end to what she calls Islamic totalitarianism. She's a former Muslim and spokesperson for the organisation One Law for All. She's speaking with Virginia Haussegger.
Maryam, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to One Plus One.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Can I start by asking you, why have you felt the need to bring your anti-Sharia law message to Australia?
I think it's because I do see quite a few parallels with what's happening here to what's going on in Britain. Obviously, in Britain, this issue is much more entrenched and it's been going on for a much longer time. But I do feel the need to tell people about the negative effects of Sharia law, particularly on the lives of women and children, and to call for equality for everybody, irrespective of their beliefs.
Well, taking the UK first, how has Sharia law been accommodated, if at all?
Well, I mean, in a sense, it has some sort of legal backing there because the courts are using the Arbitration Act and they are dealing with family matters like divorce, child custody and marriage. But one of the things we say is that family matters are also quite important matters and ones in which women in particular are being discriminated against. Just to give you an example, in a Sharia court, a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's. And the Sharia judge has said, for example, that marital rape is not a crime and domestic violence is very often accepted. And so you see quite large numbers of women and children going through these courts, over 7,000 according to their own statistics since the mid-80s, who face this sort of discrimination and inequality, and they're not getting the same rights and freedoms that are available to them in British civil courts.
You are, of course, taking many risks here. I mean, you yourself, you were born a Muslim, practicing Muslim, your parents are practicing Muslims, but you have now turned your back on that.
Yes, I am an atheist myself, and one of the things, unfortunately, given Sharia laws, the reality that there is Sharia law being practiced in many countries, including in Iran, apostasy, for example, is punishable by death, as is 130 other offences, including heresy and blasphemy, sex outside of marriage, being gay, for example.
You were born in Iran, and as you say, apostasy is punishable by death for a Muslim who walks away from Islam and is as critical as you have been. How have you got away with this?
I think actually there's a lot more people who are critical than we get to see, in a sense, and I think the more critical we are publicly, the easier it will become for others to be able to step forward and do the same.
I know you receive a lot of hate mail, but you've also become a target for death threats.
Yes, I have, and I think that's a reality for anyone who stands up against Islamism. And I really do think Sharia law is a demand of the political Islamic movement, not the demand of Muslims or Muslim immigrants. And, you know, even if you're a Muslim and you don't renounce Islam, there are a lot of Muslims who are facing death threats and intimidation because they just want to think differently, dress differently. I mean, in Tower Hamlets in London, for example, the Muslim woman counsellor there, she's a Muslim, but she doesn't want to wear the veil, and as a result she's faced threats and intimidations. And she herself has said it never used to be this way, you know. It was so different 30 years ago.
So what do you think is causing that difference? Why is it tougher or harder now?
I'd like to say again, you know, I stress the point that it has to do directly with the rise of the Islamic movement, because religion is no longer a personal belief any longer. You know, you can't practice it in a way you want, because you do have Islamic states and Islamic organizations telling you how you must dress, what you must think, how you must behave, and transgressing it results, it becomes a matter of life and death. If from a caricature of Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, to girls going to school in Afghanistan, it's no longer possible to practice religion privately because of this political movement.
So a political movement rather than a religious movement, or in fact a religion. And nevertheless, you are opening yourself up to a charge of being somewhat racist, aren't you?
Well, I mean, I can't understand how demanding that people be treated equally and that people being given universal rights, it could be seen as being racist.
But those Muslims who would say, this is my faith, this is my culture, this is what I want to practice, and indeed I want the support and perhaps the comfort of Sharia law.
I mean, I think that there's a difference between having a personal belief and having a religious court. I mean, there's a huge distinction between the two. You can be a Christian, but that doesn't necessarily mean you want to go to an ecclesiastic court for your marriage, divorce, and child custody.
No, but for those Muslims who are strong believers in their faith and believe in Sharia law, who, for example, believe that they can't actually get a religious divorce unless it goes through a Sharia court, aren't you telling them that they're wrong, and isn't that bordering on being racist?
Right. I mean, I think, first of all, you'll find a lot of Muslims who say they didn't have to go to these courts 30, 40 years ago. They have to go now.
Your message, or the message that you've brought to Australia, comes at a time when just a couple of months ago we did have a call by the head of the Australian Federation of Islamic Councils, Iqbal Patel, for Sharia law to be, or the principles of Sharia law to be introduced into Australia, and he called for a legal pluralism. Now, that has been shot down by a lot of Muslim scholars, academics, and indeed also by Australia's Attorney General, who said this will not happen.
Well, I mean, I think that this is actually the way that it's being promoted in Britain as well, a concept of legal pluralism, as if the more cultures and beliefs and laws that you bring into a society, the more tolerant it becomes. In fact, it's the other way around. And when you have a society with lots of different people, with lots of different opinions, in fact, you need to keep those beliefs out in order to be able to treat people equally.
I'm interested to know what drives you. You've been a very outspoken person right throughout your career. You've worked solidly in human rights, also with Iranian refugees. You've worked very hard for women's rights as well as children's rights. And I know you've got yourself in trouble because of your work and being kicked out of various places, even countries. What drives you?
Well, I mean, I think, like all of us, we all step in when we can, and I guess because of the situation in Iran, having had to flee an Islamic Republic of Iran, having had many of my family members dispersed across the world, people I knew being killed, I think it does make you want to take measures in order to stop an injustice. I think actually there's a huge lot of resistance in countries under Islamic rule as well. If you've seen some of the YouTube images of, for example, the protests after the so-called Iranian elections, or images of the Arab Spring. And in a sense, I feel very much tied to that resistance that takes place in other countries as well.
So the Arab Spring, has that given you a great sense of optimism?
It has. I mean, I think it has given a sense of optimism, because what it shows is that actually rights and demands for equality are not necessarily Western concepts. They're things that people everywhere want and are demanding and putting their lives on the line for. And so to say that rights are relative and certain rights are not applicable to others because they're different, actually I think what the Arab Spring and the protest movement in Iran has shown is that that's not quite true.
Whilst what you say, you can say very openly in Australia, I know there are parts of the world you've spoken in which you can't say this as openly. Do you fear for your safety?
I don't. I don't fear for my safety. I have a 5-year-old son who I would like to grow up in a much better world than this. I don't want to leave this as a legacy for him and for all of our children, in a sense. So I feel like, I think it makes living much better when you're doing something that you feel is satisfactory and you feel that you're actually defending people's rights and lives. And so in that sense, I feel great.
Maryam, I think there'd be many out there who say you're an extremely courageous, brave woman. Thank you very much for joining OnePlusOne.
Thank you, Virginia.